March 18, 2025, dawned like any other day in Gaza. The fragile ceasefire in place since January offered a glimmer of hope. It promised a reprieve from the relentless cycle of violence. Yet that hope was shattered before noon. Israeli warplanes pierced the sky, unleashing a barrage of airstrikes that shook the Gaza Strip to its core. Buildings crumbled, reduced to rubble in a matter of seconds. The air filled with the acrid smell of smoke and the heart-wrenching cries of the injured. This marked the deadliest day in Gaza since the ceasefire's fragile inception. The strikes targeted various locations throughout Gaza. They were relentless and indiscriminate. Hamas military installations were hit, but so were civilian homes, hospitals, and schools. The streets, once bustling with life, were transformed into scenes of chaos and despair. The deafening roar of explosions reverberated through the air, a terrifying symphony of destruction that seemed to have no end. The attacks continued unabated for hours, each blast further extinguishing the hope that had flickered so briefly. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows over the devastated landscape, the full extent of the carnage became horrifyingly clear. The smell of death hung heavy in the air, a grim testament to the human cost of this latest eruption of violence. Amidst the rubble and the ruin, rescue workers frantically searched for survivors. Their faces, etched with exhaustion and grief, reflected the immense suffering inflicted upon the people of Gaza. Each passing moment brought with it the grim discovery of more bodies, a stark reminder of the fragility of life in a land perpetually teetering on the brink. As the dust settled, the true horror of the March 18 airstrikes came into sharp focus. The Palestinian Ministry of Health reported a staggering number of casualties. Over 400 Palestinians were dead, many of them women and children. The injured numbered in the hundreds, overwhelming the already strained medical facilities in Gaza. Hospitals, ill-equipped to handle such a large influx of patients, struggled to cope. Operating rooms overflowed with the wounded, their cries of pain echoing through the corridors. Doctors and nurses worked tirelessly, their faces etched with exhaustion and despair, but their efforts felt woefully inadequate in the face of such widespread suffering. The sheer number of casualties painted a grim picture of the human cost of the conflict. Each life lost represented a shattered family, a community forever scarred by the horrors of that day. The images of lifeless children being pulled from the rubble, their innocent faces frozen in eternal sleep, served as a stark reminder of the indiscriminate nature of violence. The international community watched in horror as the casualty figures continued to rise. The sheer scale of the devastation was a stark reminder of the urgent need for a peaceful resolution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Yet, with each passing day, the prospect of peace seemed to slip further away, replaced by a seemingly endless cycle of violence and retribution. In the aftermath of the devastating airstrikes, Israel was quick to justify its actions. They claimed the strikes were in retaliation to Hamas's rejection of a ceasefire extension. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, in a televised address to the nation, defended the military operation, characterizing it as a necessary measure to protect Israeli citizens from the constant threat of terrorism. Netanyahu accused Hamas of using civilians as human shields, deliberately placing them in harm's way to maximize casualties and garner international sympathy. He insisted that Israel had taken every precaution to minimize civilian casualties, but that Hamas's tactics made it impossible to completely avoid them. Hamas is responsible for every drop of blood spilled, he declared, his voice laced with anger and resolve. Furthermore, Netanyahu blamed Hamas for the breakdown of the ceasefire negotiations. He accused the militant group of using the talks as a smokescreen to rearm and regroup, while never having any intention of reaching a lasting peace agreement. The recent escalation in violence, he argued, was a direct result of Hamas's intransigence and their refusal to renounce terrorism. Israel's justifications, however, were met with skepticism and outright condemnation from many quarters. Critics pointed to the disproportionate use of force and the high number of civilian casualties as evidence of a reckless disregard for Palestinian lives. They accused Israel of using the recent events as a pretext to further its own political agenda and tighten its grip on the occupied territories. Hamas, reeling from the devastating Israeli airstrikes, vehemently denied Israel's accusations. They maintained that they were committed to the terms of the ceasefire and had been engaging in good faith negotiations. Hamas spokesperson Abdel Latif al-Qanua accused Israel of fabricating a pretext to launch a surprise attack and sabotage any chance of a lasting peace. Al-Qanua pointed to Israel's recent actions, such as the halting of aid deliveries to Gaza, and the refusal to start the second phase of talks, as evidence of their lack of commitment to the ceasefire agreement. He accused Israel of deliberately escalating tensions and creating a humanitarian crisis in Gaza to pressure Hamas into concessions. Despite the devastating attacks and the mounting casualties, Hamas maintained that they were still open to dialogue and a peaceful resolution. "We are not afraid of war, but we are not warmongers," al-Qanua declared, emphasizing their desire for a just and lasting peace for the Palestinian people. However, the spokesperson also reiterated Hamas's right to defend themselves against Israeli aggression. While they did not explicitly threaten retaliation, the message was clear. Hamas would not stand idly by while their people were being subjected to such violence. The question on everyone's mind was whether this latest escalation would spiral out of control, plunging the region into yet another full-blown conflict.